Okay, um, I'm going to do my little prayer to start this off. It's just so that we're completely in a safe space, because I do that all the time now because I've had enough incidents that I don't like to muck about. So, my little prayer goes like, I am divine light in form. I send this light out, and I fill this room, I fill this house, and I surround us for 50 miles. I am completely and totally safe from all entities, beings, realms, and dimensions, in any time, in any manner, in any reality. And so it is. So that just keeps, I call them the Oogie Boogies. They're 50 miles out. Don't mess with me. It took me a long time to figure that out. I'm self-taught. I've never read other people's books. I don't do other people's courses. You know how people get online and they say, oh, I watched this one guy on YouTube and I watched this guy on YouTube. Everything I tell you is from me. If it's similar to somebody else's stuff, it's because the universe is speaking to us. And we're aligned in this grid. And when something is whispered into the grid, it not just goes to the person it's whispered to. It goes through the grid. And so my example is, do you remember when water pillows came out? You know, and all of a sudden everybody was making a water pillow. It was because somebody got the information, and once it's in the grid, other people who are very creative are going, hey, a water pillow, that'd be great. And so same thing with movies. Like 3 movies will come out with the exact same theme. You know, like 15 different people are making water pillows. It's because it's in the ether. And people who are spiritually attuned or creatively attuned, the most childlike minds can read this energy from the grid. So why are we here? What is it we're doing here today? I have a lot of information from the other world, the other worldlies. This information has been coming to me for 20 years through the grid, and it comes through the beings. So ultimately, at the end of this series of talking to you about all these things, I will have covered what we are, why we're able to have these communications, what happened to me, and how I became this way inclined. So I guess that's where I'm going to start the journey, is to tell you about my life. When I grew up with a ton of sexual abuse. I grew up with a broken family. I grew up with a whole bunch of physical difficulties and challenges, and I did not have God. You know, I used to say the power of one, all right, and you're looking at her. Because I was really defiant, really obstinate. It was like, fuck you. You know, you can't take me down, you can't get me, but not because I had some support or some sort of God or Jesus in my life. I didn't have anything. My father was a fundamentalist Christian, which actually made things worse for me, because I found that fundamentalist Christianity was oppressive and kind of guilt-driven, and it made me feel worse. It never made me feel better, and I didn't feel supported. I felt judged. So over the course of my young life, I really didn't have any background in spirituality, except the fact that my father had the fundamentalist Christian. So anyway, I had a ton of sexual abuse. I became very promiscuous. I don't know if everybody understands that when sexual abuse happens at an early age, children either become promiscuous or they become reserved. Well, I certainly wasn't going to become reserved, because in my books, you're not stealing sex from me. So I kind of I turned the tables, and I felt I was in charge. Well, it's kind of hard to be in charge at 12. You know, but in my mind, I was in charge. You know, so 12, 13, 15, 16, 17. I got married at 21, and I always call it the grace of God, because I could have so easily taken a path that would have been drugs and alcohol and prostitution and that type of thing. And again, no kind of religion, and no real help from my parents. I didn't tell my parents anything till I was 18. So that had started at 5. That was a lot of years really not having any support. So I was not the type of person you would expect to have some sort of spiritual awakening. You know, I was I was surviving my life. And it was trudgery, like trudge, just keep moving, just keep moving. And at 9 years old, I saw this woman commit suicide in her garage. And I remember clear as day going, oh, I don't have to stay. I can leave this planet. I just have to kill myself. So from 9 on, whenever anything would get challenging for me, I would say, oh, well, I can leave. I don't have to stay here. I can leave. And so I would go through kind of a suicidal roundabout in circles and circles, and then I'd say, oh, well, I'll do it tomorrow. So I kind of always convinced myself that, yeah, okay, well, that's an option, but it would hurt my family, and so, well, I'll think about that again tomorrow. Scarlett O'Hara. Oh, fiddly dee. I'll think about that tomorrow. So that's kind of a backstory of where I was, and it's a short one because it is a book. And the beings told me I was going to write a book called The Long Journey Back to Me. Now it's not written, but we'll get on that. So, anyway, how did I come to this? How come I'm sitting here telling you these stories? That came from, I was in the middle of a really bad breakup, and I was really in love with this guy, and we had broke up, and I wanted to drive by his house. When you're in love, and so I wanted to drive by his house and see his house because we'd only been broke up for 5 days. So I took my car the long way around because we were headed to a play date for my son. And I took the car the long way around, so we went up this back road with a lot of lakes, and it had been raining for 3 days. So as I'm coming up along, I see this body of water running across the road, and it's definitely this deep. And my mind goes, maybe I shouldn't even go through that water. Maybe it's going to come up over the engine and the car will stall. I decided to go through, and as I plodded into the water, and that's the word I would use, is plod into the water, I'm just moving very slowly, about 15. The water is moving from a body of water on the left across the road into a body of water on the right. And as it's moving across, it's kind of like a little river. And as I drove into it, my wheels got picked up. And as the wheels got picked up, the car started to move toward the guardrail. Now, I was on welfare. I was putting myself through university. I had no money to pay for this repair, and I went, oh shit, now I'm going to beat up the front end of my car, and it's going to cost me $80 to get a new headlight. Well, if that had been the only thing that had happened, that would be great. But as the car came up towards the guardrail was buried into the ground. And as the car came moving towards the guardrail, it went up almost like a roller coaster. So my wheel was on the guardrail. And as the car came into the body of water this way, and the wheels up on the guardrail, you would think, logic, you're either going to slip this way and get hung up on the guardrail, or the water will take you a momentum enough that the car is going to tip this way, and now I would still be tipped up this way. And once again, I was like, oh shit, this is going to cost me a lot of money because now I got to get this car towed out of here. So I have time to think this out. This is not a rapid succession of events. So as the car moved into the middle of the moving water, I'm waiting for it to do one or the other, but that's not what happens. All of a sudden, the car flips upside down, flips itself over this way, and goes out into the lake 10 feet. And it drops. So I literally dropped from like 10 feet. It flipped up and it moved itself upside down out into the water, boom. And it hit the water, to me, like a bomb. It just boom. And I was like, holy shit, what just happened? How did that happen? So I looked over at my son. Now in Nova Scotia at that time, if you were 45 pounds, you could ride in the front seat with the lap belt. So I've been asked this 100 times. Why was he in the front seat? Well, because in Nova Scotia, he could sit in the front seat with the lap belt because I had stuff in the trunk or in the back seat of the car. So my kid is 4 years old. His name is Evan. And I looked at him and I said, hey, Ev, are you okay? And he goes, yeah, I'm fine. So I was like, okay, well, Mommy's going to put down the window and we're going to crawl out of the car and we're going to go and get help. And he said, okay, Mom. So it was weird. I mean, it was all in slow motion, and I'm looking at him, and he seems to be fine. So I thought we were in a bog. Now, I grew up in Newfoundland, and a bog was all reedy and filled with water. But if a car went in on top of it, it would be held up. There's too much reedy stuff. It would never have sank. So I thought I was in a bog, and all I could think about was having to crawl through the bog to get to the friggin' side of the road. And I'm like, it's okay, you're okay. So I put my finger on the button to open the window, and the window came down about this much, 5 or 6 inches. And all of a sudden, the water started to come in the car. And it wasn't a trickle. It was coming in the car. And now I went, holy shit, okay, I'm not in a bog. Whatever I'm in is flooded, and the car is filling up with water. So I looked at Evan again, and I said, okay, we're just going to have to wait for the car to fill up with water. Now, why would I know this type of thing? I was a scuba diver. I was a deep water rescue girl. I had done water work my whole life. I had been a swimmer. I've been on the swim teams. I was a swimmer. So I was getting out of this car. To me, there was no way I was not getting out of this car. So I reached over to Evan, and I took my hand and I wrapped his coat around so that I had the coat in my hand. Now, at that time, too, I was a bodybuilder. I was strong. To me, there was no way I was getting trapped in this car. The thing I didn't understand was that the car was upside down, and the water was coming up this way, and I was disoriented. So I thought the water was coming up my body, which meant by the time it reached here, I would have, we could take a breath and get out. But because I was upside down, the water was coming up over my head. So the water came up over my head, and when it hit my chest, I thought it was time to go. But the rest of the car hadn't filled with water yet. So I got Evan in my hand here, and I'm pulling on the door here, and there's nothing moving. So in my confusion, I'm like, why won't the door open? So I couldn't navigate with him in my hand. So I reached over and I grabbed him this way, and I put him between the 2 seats, and I pushed him through the back. At that point, he was a pretty small little guy. He was only 4. So I pushed him into the back seat thinking he can stand up and get the air that's in the car. I didn't know about the air in the car because I was still sitting. I was confused. Anyway, I started to push on the buttons and on the windows, and I'm pushing on things. The seatbelt is still across my shoulder, and I'm pushing on the buttons, and nothing's happening. And all of a sudden, I have to breathe. When you have to breathe, it doesn't matter if water's there or not. So I took in a big, deep breath of water. And so I went, and as the water entered my lungs, my state of calmness, of trying to get out of this car, just disappeared. And I was in pure panic, because if I was breathing water in and it felt like breathing liquid fire, so was Evan. So I panicked at this point. I was like, holy shit, I'm not getting out of this car. So I wanted to pull his little body back. I wanted to hold him, because at this point he must have been so confused that I had sent him away in this time of trial or upset or chaos. So I started, and again, I didn't get up out of the seat. These are things that I look back at now and I shake my head and I'm like, why didn't I get up out of the chair? But I sat in the chair, and I kept looking for a boot or a coat, trying to find something so I could pull him back into my body. Because now I was feeling really badly because he was alone having this event happen. And I couldn't find him. So the panic is in me complete now, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't find him, and I have to breathe again. And so as I went to take in the next breath of water, this magnificent, booming, majestic voice goes, relax. And I went, fuck you. I didn't take orders when I was living. I'm not taking them when I'm dying. So I was not having any of this relaxed, booming voice. He's obstinate to the very bitter end. Anyway, the voice said relax a second time, and then all of a sudden, like it completely understood, oh yeah, she's really difficult to deal with. Let's not do this. So all of a sudden it started cooing like a mommy would. You're okay, you're okay, you're okay, we're right here. And I'm like, we were. And I'm like, holy, and all of a sudden, now I had stopped looking for Evan's body. I was so consumed with the relaxing, booming voice, and now it had changed to this cooing voice, and it's telling me that everything's okay. We're right here. We're going to help you. And what do you say to this? Holy shit. And all of a sudden the voice said, if you continue to fight the water, you're going to drown. And I was like, no shit, Sherlock? Oh my God, like, you're the smartest ass ghost in the world. So I had no spirituality to think this was anything than either my brain or some sort of ghost. But time just stood still. So I'm having this communication with this being. 1 minute is relaxing me, and the next minute is explaining that I'm going to drown. I'm already drowning. But then, like an infusion of information, I understood that if I continued to fight the water, my lungs would fill up with water, and they couldn't get me back. They couldn't pump me down and get me to come back. So I had to, and the voice kept saying, you have to surrender. You have to surrender to the water and pass over. And when you do that, we can help you. And at that point, I remembered, oh, since 9 years old, that woman dying in the garage, I've been wanting to die. I've been saying, oh, I'll just commit suicide. Why am I fighting? Why am I fighting this? Now, Evan's gone from my head. He's not even a thought. So now it's a crisis within me. Well, I might as well just die, because that's what I've wanted for so long. So I put my arms out like this in the water, and I laid my head back. I stopped trying to breathe. It just stopped. Everything stopped. And I said, give yourself over to absolute pleasure. And I laid my head back, and I died. But this is the running joke, I couldn't even die right. I didn't go down the tunnel into the arms of God. I didn't go down and see the light. I didn't see all my ancestors waiting for me. Welcome home. No! I got sucked out of the top of my head. So, at Costco, that thing, they put the money in, and it goes, and it goes sucking across the room. Well, it was like somebody put one of those on the top of my head. And the essence that makes me, so my body is Shelley Yates, but the essence that makes me move and live is a being, an eternal, divine being. And it got sucked right out of the top of my head. And all of a sudden, I was no longer in the room with the car, with what was happening. I was in a glass room over the 33rd parallel. Weird stuff that you remember. And the room was a rectangular shape, and it had glass walls, but I couldn't see glass walls, but I knew I was contained in some sort of room. So in the middle of the room was a table. It was 4 feet by 4 feet. It was 4 inches wide. It had a pedestal base, and it was a square. And down the left-hand side of the table were 3 hooded beings. They looked like they were in monks' robes, heavy robes that came down over their faces, big hoops in their arms so you can put your arms together and sit like this. And the robes on this side, just for ease, the robes on the left were dark, but they weren't black. So it wasn't absolute black and absolute white. It was dark and light. So on this side, there was 3 beings. And there was a being in the corner, and a being in the middle, and a being at this corner. Now this being I got to see this. The being took its hand out of the robe, and as the hand came out of the robe, it was this long, slim, fragile-looking hand. It looked like mercury in a tube. You could see like liquid metal inside the skin. And the hand came out. It had very long fingers. People always say, was it 3 or 4? I don't remember. I don't have a sense of how many fingers. But it looked like a hand. So it picked the die up. Everything was very fluid and feminine almost. And it picked this die that was on the table up. And it had six sides. It was a hexagonal die. dice, and on it was little symbols, which I later, they looked like runes, but I didn't know what a rune was at that time, but it's easy to tell you what it looked like. It looked like runes. And on the tabletop, it was a granite marble tabletop, was the Pangea. Well, I didn't know what a Pangea was either, and lots of people don't know what a Pangea is. But the Pangea was the belief that all the continents on the planet were once one big continent, and that through Earth shifts and movements and all these things, they broke up and they moved around. Well, I was looking at the Pangea. I knew it was the Pangea, even though I didn't know that word. So the being here in the corner picked up the die and just tossed it, very eloquently, like a little flick. And the die tumbled across the table. And as it tumbled across the table, the Pangea shifted. And you could hear it grinding as the table became Rocky Lake Road, which was my car driving up the road. And I was like, oh, there's my car driving up the road. So I had no body, I had no eyes, but I could see everything. So that was strange in itself. So as my car is driving up the road, this being that just rolled the die is pissed off. I can't even believe an otherworldly getting pissed off, but it was pissed off. And it took this big long finger and it went ping, and it hit my car. Now, this is like an episode of Supernatural from a TV show, because I just described to you that my car went up, turned itself over, flipped itself over, and went out into the lake and dropped. Well, now it explained why. Because this big being flicked my car with its finger. And the car went flying around, tipped around, and went out and dropped itself into the lake. I was like, holy shit, you pinged me into the lake. Why did you do that? And now down the left-hand side of the table are 3 other beings. So these guys are the dark guys, and these guys are the light guys. And I don't know if they're guys or girls. I have no sense of that. But down this left side, all of a sudden, this chanting starts. Twist of fate, twist of fate, twist of fate. We can only intervene in the corners. And I was like, oh my God, this is a game. They have rules. They're playing a game with us. And I'm like, what's happening? So this corner guy had made the chaos, and this corner guy was fixing it. And they can only intervene on the corners. So if this guy had done it, he couldn't have intervened. So because it was a corner-to-corner move, this guy, and this guy all could intervene because it was they worked together as a whole. So they each moved the die across the board. I didn't see that, but it was like everything happened very quickly. And then they're going twist of fate, twist of fate, twist of fate. And the table went from square and it rounded itself off into a circle. And everything on the map stayed the same. My car was there in the lake, and I could look at it. And these three beings put something on the board. Boink, boink, boink. And they put something on the board, and then down at this end, this guy was finished. So these guys had taken their turn. Now the table went back to square, and from this guy to this guy, there could have been an intervention on some sort, but there was nothing to intervene on because they'd already helped me. And this guy goes, I'm so bored with this. And he took his long, skinny hand out and he swept it over the board like that. And the board changed to South America, and there was like an earthquake go off and a volcano. And I was like, ah! So these guys were chaos creators, and these guys were harmony makers. And they're both essential to our experience on Earth at this time. They are not essential for the next time. But for right now, where we are, where we're living, we have 2 sets of influences on us all the time. We have the dark influence and we have the light influence. And we can work with both sets of energies. It's up to us. Now I'm quickly going to tell you why I said I couldn't even die right. Because when Evan came back from his death experience, he goes, oh, Mummy, I went down the tunnel into the light and I rested in the arms of God. And I went, shit, I can't even die right. Like, here's my kid having this beautiful, beautiful experience resting in the arms of God. And then he says, oh, God has 2 sets of angels. And he said there's two armies of angels. He used the word armies, the light ones and the dark ones. Well, now this is kind of cool because mine were the light ones and the dark ones. So fast forward to when I first started having communication with these beings, I said, why did he get the tunnel of light and the arms of God? And I got sucked out of the top of my head to hang out with a bunch of extraterrestrials. And they said because of his innocence, his purity, the path that he took was the one that was intended for us. And because of my obstinance, they knew I would not buy into any of this God stuff or love stuff or angel stuff. So they said, you were a child of Star Trek, and we knew we could work with you there. Because I was a child of Star Trek, I had no trouble believing there was otherworldlies or extraterrestrials. None whatsoever. But to talk about God and angels, I don't think so. So that story will come later. But basically, so Evan goes down the light into the tunnel, rests in the arms of God. He starts to talk about the light angels and the dark angels. And he says, they're both of God. And he said, the light ones have a light that come out of the top of their chest. And he said, the light that comes out of the top of their chest is their individual light. Yellow light, purple light, green light. Like the light that was coming up out of their chest was their individual light. But then he took his little hand, 4 years old, and he stuck his finger into his shoulder, and he came across like this. And he said, but they all have this light. And he talked about the Christ light. That's exactly, now he didn't have any religion. And the running joke around that was, the only time Evan ever heard about God, I was swearing. He certainly wasn't hearing about angels and light, and he certainly didn't know what Christ light was. He didn't know who Christ was. So he had no basis, and this is why I guess he was so pure. So here he is with his little hand telling me about the Christ light. He didn't call it that. He said they all have this beautiful light around their heads. And he says, oh, Mommy, it's just, he said it's love like Mommy's hugs and kisses. It's just nothing but love. And I get goosebumps when I start to tell the story because his little 4-year-old face there was no doubt. There was no question. But he said God also had a dark angel group, an army of angels. And he said they don't have any light coming out of their chest. And he said they don't have the light over their head. And he said, and they have 2 little horns right here. And I said, little horns? He goes, oh yeah, they're just little. They just sit right here. And I was like, because I knew the Bible stories. I knew church stuff. I knew God stuff. And I was like, how does he know this? Did he see this? So I just came to the decision that his experiences were real. He was having a near-death experience with God. So anyway, right here on my arm is a little homage to my son, because in his 4-year-old crayon days, everything in my house now had these circles on them, like this. And I said, what are these circles? And he said, oh, Mom, he said, they're portals. And I said, portals? He said, yeah, it's a vortex. He said, God uses it to jump between the dimensions. And I was like, okay. Okay, here's the kid, these 4 talking about dimensions, jumping through dimensions. And then he, clear as day, says to me, oh, we can all do it. We have just forgotten. And I said, what do you mean? He said, we people, we can jump between these vortexes, through these portals, and go to other dimensions. Now, back to the fact that he's 4 years old, and he doesn't know any of this stuff. So everything he said became a validating truth for me, because I had had the dark and the light, but I had had the extraterrestrial type of experience because I couldn't accept his experience. So when we come into this world and when we go out of this world, we do not do it alone. Everybody says, oh, I came into this world alone, I'll go out of this world alone. You don't. You come in with a group of angels and guides and beings, and you leave with a group of angels and guides and beings, whatever your collection is, whatever you need, and whatever you need to bring you in and get you out of here in peace and ease. So all this whole story is to tell humanity what I've been told, is that these beings want to ease our way into the next experience. So come back to Evan. He's had this experience with God. He says the army of light and the army of dark are having a war for the planet. And he said that it's been going on for a long time. And he looks at me and his face says it all. Don't worry, Mommy, the light is going to win. So no matter how much I've struggled with this as a truth for me, that 4-year-old faith and face and faith of him looking at me saying, oh, the light's going to win. It's no big deal. He says, we just have to play this out. So that's what we're doing right now, is playing this out. So put me back in the car. I'm drowning. I'm dead. I'm floating in the car. He's floating in the back. I'm up with a group of beings showing me all these events that are happening. And they tell me, we're going to come and tell you how to put your son's body back together. So there's 2 parts to a body. These are things that we need to know as a species, as a human race. We have 2 parts to every body. We have an energy part, a soul, a prana, a chi. All over the world we have a word for it. The energy that drives the suit that we live in. And the suit is the individual color of us. You know, it's like it's our own flavor on the story. But the suits are temporary. And the suits will die and decay and move out of the reality, but the beingness of us will not. And it will take with us what we learned as the human. So I'm dead in the car, I'm having this ET experience, Evan's having his experience in the back seat, and what's happening in real life. So remember I said they put 3 things on the table. So the first thing they put on the table was a man coming down that street. It was called Rocky Lake Road. And he had a passenger with him. And another man going up that street. And they're passing each other. Now, I've driven into the lake right there. The first guy drives by, I'm not in the lake. I go in the lake, and as the second guy goes by, he goes, did you see the car in the lake? And the first guy goes, wasn't there when I drove by. So the first thing he said, do you see any wet people? So he wants to know, has somebody gotten out and they're standing on the side of the road? Now the first interesting piece about this little story is that the man who saw the car never forgets anything. He's just the most perfect. He never forgets anything. He's always on time. It's who he is. But this particular day, he forgot his paperwork and had to go home and get it. So this is the first strange thing that was put on the table. So he's going the opposite direction, and the other guy's like, I'm on my way back. So he turned around and came back because he knew somebody was still in that car. And he was the type of guy that was going to help. Now, the story gets really complicated because I got to spin off here for a second and say 1 year previous to that man coming to save me in that lake that day, my boyfriend saved his life. He had a heart attack, and my boyfriend was one of the volunteer fire department, and he was the first one on the scene, secured everything, did all that, and saved that man's life. His name was Patty Hilchey. So Patty Hilchey's in the car, and the other guy is Mark Hoadley, and they're passing each other. So that was the first thing they put on the board, was this recognition that I had just driven in and somebody needed to get me out. So now the 2 of them come back to the place to go in the water, and Patty says to the guy, he called him Shit Rat. That was his nickname. And he's like, Shit Rat, you're staying in the car because I'm going swimming. So he pulled off his boots. Now he just had a heart attack a year. He's had a bypass. This man was incredible. So he gets out, he pulls out his coat, he pulls off his boots, and he says he makes 2 big dance, and he's like, he jumps, and he puts his foot on the guardrail, and he jumps into the lake. And he says the cold water hit him so much, he said, my bowels went up in my throat. I can't breathe. And the other man, Mark Hoadley's on the side of the road. So Patty's like 6'3", big guy. Mark Hoadley's a little guy. You know, maybe 5'6", maybe 130 or 40 pounds, little guy. And Patty's going, get in this damn lake. And he's like, I'm just going to wait for the paramedics. Get in here now. So anyway, the other guy takes off his shoes and his coat and he jumps in. Now the 2 of them are in the lake. And so they're trying to get my body out of the car. And they reach in the window because the window's open and they can feel my hair. And the guy keeps going, there's somebody in there, I can feel them, but they can't get me out. So anyway, they can't get the door open. They can't get anything open. It's this big struggle of life to get me out of the car. And finally, he hooks his foot underneath the door handle. And when he does that, he pops his knee back and the door pops open. And now he's down there trying to get me out. And he's going to cut the seat belt off. And by now, though, he's so tired. They've been 15 minutes. It's November 14th. It's cold. And so he said he was so cold that his hand wouldn't close to grab my body. So he took his fingers and he opened them really wide and he wove my hair, which was really long. And he just kept weaving my hair in amongst his fingers until he had a big knot of hair. And then he said, I was so cold I couldn't pull you. So he started throwing his body back like this. And he said, finally you popped out. So I popped out of the car and he pushed my body over to the other man who's now just as equally as cold. He's hanging onto a tree because he can't grab anything. And he says he reaches around and he grabbed me by the boob. And he said he had a hold of my boob, and he said your head lolled back like that. He said your eyes were filled with moss, your nose was filled with moss. He said your skin was black and your lips were blue, and he started to scream, get this dead chick out of my arms, gross, gross, gross. So that was the first thing. These two men were the first thing put on the board. Now the second thing that was put on the board was the passenger in the car that he had said, shit rat, you're not going swimming, I'm going swimming. He was a paramedic. So he was he'd been 9 years paramedic. They pulled me out, he hauled me up over the guardrail, and he started doing CPR. So that was 15 minutes to get me out of the car, 7 minutes of CPR. So he's pushing, trying to get me to come back. And finally he sits back and he says, look, I'm exhausted, and she's gone. And just like that, I sat up and I said, get my baby out of the lake. So everybody started to scream because now there's a group of people around watching what's happening. And he's like, holy shit, there's a baby in the lake, there's a baby in the lake. Now the two guys that were there were so cold and tired that even though they went back in, they weren't doing much good. And there was the running joke about that one was the big guy kept taking the little guy by the collar and pushing him in, pushing him around the car, trying to find the baby. So now we can laugh at it. But at that time, nobody was laughing because they couldn't find Evan. So that was the second thing. So now I had a CPR happen. Now I'm awake. So 15 minutes, and now it's 7 minutes. So all of a sudden, this man, now for 35 years, he claims that he would come down from the quarry, he would go up the road, and he would do his paperwork and come back down and go back to the quarry. And he said this was the first time in 30 years, 35 years, the man was not there. These things were weird, like one-ofs, that these things had never happened. So this man was not in his office, and the guy was pissed off. He said, I wasted my time coming up here today because you're not there. But as he comes back, he sees the whole kerfuffle that's happening. He knows that there's a baby in the car and that they can't get the car out of the lake. So he says he left and went up the road to the quarry, which probably was a couple of minutes to get up to the quarry. And he said he knew there was a boom truck, but he knew it wasn't in the yard because it was never in the yard at this time of day. And he drove up the hill, and there's the boom truck sitting in the quarry. And it was one of those, oh my God, the boom truck is there. So he brings the boom truck down. Now this is where people get into this debate about how long Evan was underwater. Well, 15 minutes to get me out, 7 minutes of CPR. The man had to drive back, go up and get the boom truck. So what are we at? 20 plus minutes. So now they drove the boom truck down. I don't know if you guys have ever seen a boom truck set up, but the two legs have to go out the front, the two legs have to go out the back, the boom has to go up, it has to be threaded or whatever the word is, and then somebody has to go in the car and wrap the boom around the axle. So by this time, the two guys that saved me could not go back in the water. So another man went in the water and set the axle up and hooked the boom around the axle. And this time, now they're pulling the car up out of the lake. And they have me on the ground. And I'm sure you've all heard about mother's love. And super, super strong. Well, it took 4 people to hold me down because I was screaming. oh my God, I killed my baby. Oh my God, I killed my baby. Because as they brought the car up, here his little body was floating in the back window. And that was intense. It's like, oh my God, I killed my baby. And the guy who had Patty, he's like, it's okay, we got him, he's fine. I'm like, he's not fine? Holy shit. Anyway, so another man opened the door and his little body floated out of the car and they caught him. And they kept telling me he was fine, he was fine, he was fine. It was traumatic. It was intense. It was a Sunday night movie. You know, here this man has my little boy's body, and now they put me in one ambulance and they put him in another ambulance, and they're going to take us to 2 different hospitals. And I get to my hospital and I'm in bad shape. My heart rate, my blood pressure, everything's through the roof. And they're like, your son is dead, so don't move. You know, you're going to have a heart attack. And my girlfriend rushes over to the hospital and comes back and she says, he's not dead, get up and come on. And the doctor's like, he's dead, because everybody thought he was dead. So I said, what do I have to do for you to let me go over to that hospital? I want to get out of here. And he said, you get your vitals under control and we'll let you go. And he said to me after, he said, I didn't think you could do it. So I was like 250 over 195. I was a heart attack waiting to happen. And in a matter of 20 minutes, I was 120 over 80. It was just like, boom. We are the most amazing creatures. We are. And I was going. So I stood up stark naked and I said, you better get me some clothes or I'm going naked. So they got me some clothes. I look like a sausage. They put me in size 7. Track pants and a t-shirt, paper slippers, worms in my hair. And I was like, I'm coming, Evan. I'm coming. So I get to the hospital, and here's Evan. He's in a coma. He's in this intensive care unit. He has wires coming out of everywhere in his head. He's got tubes coming out of everywhere in his body. All the tubes are running. He's bleeding internally, and all the blood is running into the tubes. And these wires that are on his head are hooked up to this machine. And I looked around, and they've got blue lights on in there, and they were blowing cold air over his body. And I was like, no, I'm alive and well. He should be alive and well. Why is he set up like this? And the doctor said to me, he said, we have put him in this state so you can say goodbye. We're just keeping him alive long enough for you to go in and say goodbye, and then we're going to unplug him and let him go.